Hello everyone, today's story will be about a virus that spreads throughout the city and leaves no one alive. People are going crazy because of this virus, but still some of them do not give up and continue to fight it. Who will win? People, or this deadly virus? The film starts with a young couple, Jim and his girlfriend Kat, waking up together in Taipei. As they wake, Jim asks Kat to skip work for the day, but she declines, reminding him of their upcoming trip to Kenting, something Jim had forgotten. He explains that a friend has offered him a job with a German ad agency, and the pay is too good to turn down. Apologizing, Jim explains he really needs the money, leaving Kat frustrated, as she rarely takes time off work. Shortly after, Jim switches on the news, where a doctor is discussing the Alvin virus. The doctor expresses concern about the virus, stating experts are alarmed by its mutation potential, comparing its dormant protein chains to those found in rabies. He warns the public to take the outbreak seriously, emphasizing that Alvin is a significant threat to public health. Stepping out onto the balcony for some fresh air, Jim notices an elderly woman on a nearby rooftop. He calls out to check if she's okay. The woman slowly turns toward him, revealing her blood-soaked clothing. Before Jim can react, she disappears when he looks away to speak to Kat. Shaken, Jim then chats with his neighbor, Mr. Lin, from his balcony. Noticing that Mr. Lin seems unwell, Jim suggests he visit the hospital. Mr. Lin dismisses the idea, saying the doctors will just send him home to rest. He also downplays the virus, calling it a hoax. After their conversation, Jim says goodbye to Mr. Lin, charges his phone, and heads to the train station with Kat. On the way, they notice police arresting a man apparently involved in a recent fatal incident. Eventually, Jim and Kat arrive at the station, where Jim promises to make it up to her by cooking dinner later. After seeing her off, Jim heads back home and spots the same police car from earlier, its doors wide open, but the officers are nowhere to be seen. Feeling uneasy, Jim stops at a diner for a quick bite. While there, he sees the same old woman from the rooftop, now covered in blood with dark, eerie eyes. Suddenly, she spits on a customer before throwing boiling oil at the vendor. Chaos ensues as the customer, now infected, turns violent and stabs his friend in the neck, horrifying the bystanders. Shocked, Jim quietly backs out of the diner and steps outside, just in time to witness the old woman get hit by a passing car. However, the driver appears just as erratic as the woman and the violent diner customer, revealing they've all been infected by something. As the situation spirals out of control, Jim runs for his life with the infected close behind. He makes it back to his apartment, locking himself inside, and immediately tries to call Kat. Turning on the TV, he finds every channel broadcasting an emergency alert, except for one, which strangely plays a cartoon. Soon after, Jim hears a chilling announcement from outside, ordering all men to report to the district office. Shockingly, the announcer casually mentions that the men will be castrated, while the women will be assaulted in the streets. This sends Jim into a panic, especially worried about Kat's safety. He quickly texts her to ask where she is, but while he's focused on his phone, he doesn't notice someone approaching from the balcony. Jim is too engrossed in messaging Kat, telling her what's happening and that he'll come get her, to realize the danger lurking behind him. When he finally becomes aware, he turns around just in time to see Mr. Lin, now infected, lunging at him with a pair of garden shears. Jim barely manages to grab the blades, but in the struggle, 2 of his fingers are severed. In agony, Jim kicks Mr. Lin away, but to his horror, the infected man picks up one of the severed fingers, bites into it, and spits it out. Acting quickly, Jim grabs a toaster and smashes it over Mr. Lin's head before the situation can worsen. Without wasting more time, Jim grabs his phone and flees as Mr. Lin begins to get back up. Outside, Jim quickly wraps his injured hand with a cloth he finds on a parked motorcycle. Just then, he witnesses a group of infected people brutally attacking a young man, forcing Jim to run again. Finally, he reaches his motorcycle and attempts to start the engine quietly, trying not to attract attention from the nearby infected. Unfortunately, the noise alerts them, and he quickly revs the engine, speeding off as they chase him. Meanwhile, Kat is on a train heading to work, quietly engrossed in a novel. Her peace is interrupted when a businessman strikes up a conversation, persistently bothering her. Feeling irritated, she warns him that she'll report him to the police if he doesn't stop, which clearly offends him. Ignoring him, Kat stands up and allows another passenger to take her seat. Suddenly, chaos erupts as an infected passenger starts stabbing others. quickly turning the train into a scene of horrific violence. The other passengers manage to subdue the first infected man, but soon after, another infected person begins attacking commuters with a knife. It doesn't take long before more people become infected, viciously biting off chunks of flesh from their victims. Meanwhile, the girl who took Kat's seat is suddenly stabbed in the eye by the businessman, and Kat tries her best to keep her calm amid the madness. When the train doors finally open, the passengers rush to escape. Unfortunately, in the panic, Kat accidentally leaves her phone behind. She escapes alongside another passenger, Molly, who insists they need to get away quickly. However, Kat refuses to abandon Molly, determined that they must reach the hospital together. Unfortunately, the businessman catches up to them, forcing Kat and Molly to flee for their lives. They encounter another commuter and plead for help, but in a shocking turn, the businessman bites off the man's nose and brutally kills him with an axe. With no time to lose, Kat and Molly run, barely managing to escape the subway, just as a subway worker closes the door behind them. Furious that the worker didn't help them, Molly strikes him without hesitation. Kat then asks the worker for directions to the hospital, and he agrees to accompany them there. Meanwhile, Jim fights back nausea as he navigates the streets, littered with dead bodies. His horror intensifies when he witnesses a man violating a corpse, prompting him to speed away in disgust. Jim, feeling lightheaded from blood loss, decides to take a break. He examines his injury, rewraps his hand with a cloth, and uses tape to secure it, hoping to slow the bleeding. Checking his phone for any messages from Kat, he spots a sickle lying on the side of the road and picks it up. Moments later, he witnesses a group of infected boys mercilessly beating a man with baseball bats. The boys seem to be enjoying their brutal game, which pushes Jim to intervene. He rushes in and takes down two of the boys, who quickly flee when they realize they can't handle him. After freeing the man, Jim tries to help him, only to discover that the man is also infected and disturbingly enjoying the violence. Before long, the boys return, this time throwing rocks at Jim, forcing him to make a quick escape. Meanwhile, at the hospital, people watch a civil emergency message on the television as Kat, Molly, and the subway worker arrive. The police officers stationed at the entrance allow them inside, and a nurse rushes over to tend to an injured patient. One of the officers informs Kat that the emergency room is overwhelmed. The nurse tries to take Molly away for treatment, but Molly adamantly refuses to go without Kat.in and attempt to comfort her. Kat reassures Molly, who expresses her gratitude, saying she'll never forget how Kat saved her life. Eventually, Molly agrees to go with the nurse, while Kat returns to the waiting area with the subway worker. It's then that Kat realizes her phone is missing and asks the subway worker if she can use his phone to call Jim. At the same time, the president of Taiwan addresses the nation, assuring everyone that the government is working tirelessly to find a solution to the crisis. Meanwhile, a general announces that they are dealing with a contagious disease that turns ordinary people into violent, uncontrollable beings. He warns that the infected will kill, assault, and torture others, urging the public to follow the guidelines set by the Ministry of Homeland Security. Unfortunately, the general soon begins showing signs of infection himself. Without warning, he attacks the president and detonates a grenade, blowing his head off. Chaos erupts in the hospital's waiting area as patients panic and start turning on each other. The police struggle to regain control of the situation. Amid the chaos, Kat gets into a scuffle with the subway worker when she refuses to return his phone. During the struggle, she spots the businessman outside and immediately grabs the subway worker's phone before fleeing down the stairwell. Unfortunately, as she escapes, the businessman brutally kills a police officer with his axe and forces his way into the hospital, throwing the crowd into further panic. Soon, more infected burst in and start attacking the patients. In the chaos, the subway worker hides under a gurney, leaving Molly alone in the hallway. Tragically, the businessman finds Molly and violently assaults her. Meanwhile, Jim finally receives a message from Kat on the subway worker's phone. She tells him she lost her phone and is at a hospital. Jim quickly calls her back, reassuring her that he's coming and urging her to stay calm. He advises Kat to find a safe place to hide, but during their conversation, Jim starts showing signs of infection. Despite this, he composes himself and promises Kat that he will reach her soon. Moments later, the subway worker emerges from his hiding spot, searching for an escape route. Unfortunately, he stumbles upon an infected Molly. When he accidentally makes a noise, she notices him, and several other infected individuals overpower him. In a shocking twist, Molly brutally kills the subway worker with a piece of hospital equipment. Meanwhile, Kat is forced to flee and barricades the hallway doors to protect herself from 2 infected patients and the businessman. Despite her best efforts, the businessman breaks through the doors and continues to pursue her, taunting Kat with details of the horrific things he did to Molly. Refusing to become his next victim, Kat surprises him from behind, brutally killing him by smashing his head in. Just then, a man opens the door to the maternity ward nearby, and Kat quickly slips inside the room to avoid the advancing infected. The man, who introduces himself as Dr. Wong, points a gun at Kat and demands she handcuff herself to the shower pipe. He then turns on the shower, explaining that the liquid is a chemical disinfectant. After a moment, Wong realizes that Kat seems uninfected and speculates she might be immune, asking about her blood type. He switches off the shower and instructs Kat to undress so he can confirm she isn't infected. With no other option, Kat begins to remove her clothes, carefully concealing the subway worker's phone from Wong. Once Kat is completely undressed, Wong turns the shower back on. Kat struggles to suppress a scream as the cold chemical solution touches her skin. Meanwhile, Jim finally arrives at the hospital. Back in the ward, Wong removes Kat's handcuffs and allows her to get dressed, apologizing for scaring her with his 3D printed gun. He explains that he's been trying to warn people about the Alvin virus for a year, but no one trusts doctors anymore. Wong elaborates that the virus affects the limbic system in the brain, suggesting that its mutation was a natural process. He believes the infected likely understand that their actions are horrific, but the desire to commit them is overpowering. In summary, Wong tells Kat that the virus drives infected individuals to commit the most monstrous acts imaginable. After explaining the situation, Wong informs Kat she needs to undergo a blood test. As Kat stashes her clothes and the subway worker's phone in a nearby dumpster, she suddenly hears a baby crying. Intrigued, she opens the dumpster and discovers an infected baby inside. Before she can react, Wong injects her with a sample of the Alvin virus and cuffs her to the shower again. He pulls the shower curtain closed and proceeds to kill the baby, telling Kat that if she shows no signs of infection, they'll head to the rooftop, where he plans to use her to develop a vaccine. He warns that he won't hesitate to kill her if she becomes infected. Meanwhile, it's revealed that Kat still has the subway worker's phone, but it's locked with a passcode. Wong then confesses that he injected 8 infants in the ward with the virus, hoping one of them might develop valuable antibodies. He justifies his actions by claiming that the infected would have killed the babies anyway, and that he made the most logical decision under the circumstances. Kat manages to figure out the phone's passcode and sends a message to Jim. As Jim receives the message, he drops his phone in shock before rushing toward the maternity ward. A few minutes later, Wong gets a text notifying him that the helicopter coming to pick him up will arrive in 5 minutes. He prepares to leave and checks on Kat, who firmly insists that she isn't sick. Soon, they exit the ward together. As they move down the hallway, Kat realizes that the businessman's axe is missing. Suddenly, one of the infected patients from earlier attacks, severing a portion of Wong's foot. This forces him to shoot the attacker in the head. He then shoots a second infected person twice before vomiting from the pain of his injury. In his weakened state, Wong instructs Kat to help him stand, insisting that she won't be able to reach the rooftop without his assistance. Reluctantly, Kat helps him walk, but they are soon confronted by an infected Jim. Wong fires at Jim, but during the struggle, the bullet hits Jim in the neck. Unfortunately for Wong, when he tries to shoot again, his gun misfires, giving Kat the opportunity to grab his keys. Meanwhile, Jim, now enraged, attacks Wong with his sickle. Just before Jim can finish him off, Wong admits that he took pleasure in killing the babies. With no time to spare, Kat quickly unlocks the gate to the rooftop, leaving Jim furious behind her. Kat then asks Jim how it feels to be infected, to which Jim replies that it feels incredible. He explains that he's found a new purpose in life. When Kat asks what that purpose is, Jim chillingly reveals it's to mutilate her body and crush her face. Realizing her boyfriend is beyond saving, Kat begins to cry. However, moments later, she starts laughing uncontrollably, a likely sign that she's psychologically broken from everything she's endured, and possibly that she's infected too. She rushes to the rooftop just as the helicopter arrives. Shortly after, Jim hears a series of gunshots, suggesting that Kat has been shot and killed. Leaning against the stairwell gate, Jim dies with a grin on his face. And that's how the movie ends. This story is just a real horror. I think none of you would like to get into such a situation, but still it's fiction, so I think this will never really happen. But still, if it happens, then I think that people will cope with this virus and defeat all the zombies. But still, I feel sorry for these people from the film, especially this young couple. I think that if it hadn't been for the virus, everything would have turned out great for them.